I've been running this channel for about 3 years now, and no release of any watch has ever challenged me the way that this Tudor release for Watches and Wonders 2022 has. This has really made me think about who am I and what am I trying to achieve in running this channel. As a YouTuber, trying to look at the watch industry and watch releases kind of through what it means for other enthusiasts, this watch release from Tudor is magnificent. It is everything that most of those people would want. As a watch enthusiast, as someone who wants to love these watches, I loathed this release. It was everything I feared it would be, and it has quite literally repelled me from the brand. That's quite a bridge to cross. Another thing that this release did was it actually reinforced my view that there's real value in YouTubers, any watch reviewer actually, taking in and considering the views of other watch reviewers before they form, and more importantly, before they start putting their opinions out there for the world. What I want to do now is talk about each of those three things. Okay, so before we get in, I just want to touch some quick facts just so that we're all talking about the same thing. What we're talking about here are the Tudor releases for Watches and Wonders 2022. They gave us quite a number of watches. We got the Black Bay Pro GMT, a 39mm steel bezeled GMT with a bracelet update. We got a Black Bay GMT color variation with a black and burgundy, I'll call it. I don't really know what other colors to call it right now, so I'll just call it black and kind of a burgundy look, aluminium bezel insert. We got a Black Bay Chronograph based on last year's white dial. That comes this time, it's been updated with the steel and gold champagne dial treatment. Continues to come with that manufacture movement based on the Breitling. We got a brace of, I'll call them straight non-timing bezel Black Bays, 31, 36, 39, and 41, all in this what Tudor calls steel gold, otherwise known as two-tone for most other people. This came with a movement and bracelet upgrade, and not spoken about much, and frankly I won't talk about it much today either. A new variant of the Royal, a watch which is largely ignored within the enthusiast community, and hasn't really been discussed out there in the media, and frankly I'm not going to really discuss it much more. First and foremost, this release is very heavily Black Bay focused. The Black Bay is by far the most popular, quite possibly the only popular Tudor amongst most enthusiasts. It's the only one that really gets any airtime. So by focusing on a Black Bay, Tudor is already playing its greatest hits. In the lead up to this show, everyone was talking about how they desperately wanted to see more Tudor Black Bay GMTs. Mainly what they wanted to see was the Black Bay GMT in a smaller size, a 58, but I think people were really after any color variation. They got both. And this is at a time when I think it would be fair to say that the GMT is having a bit of a moment. Look at the Watches and Wonders show, and there's any number of new GMTs coming out. By giving people, by and large, what they wanted, both within the Tudor line and more generally, this was a really smart move. There was a couple of things going on that I think just enthusiasts generally really like to see. We saw some bracelet updates, and this is a time when the community, the watch enthusiast community, is going nuts over bracelets and making bracelets as good as they can be. So by improving the bracelets there, which they've clearly done with some more micro adjusts and some more options on some of their watches, Breitling, Tudor have definitely played this one for the crowd. Really smartly done. Likewise, we've got a move to more in-house movements in the straight no timing bezel black base. Again, something that the community is really going to appreciate and is a smart move. Across the industry, we've seen everyone's continuing to look backwards, but the focus area is shifting from that kind of mid 50s, early 60s style to more late 60s, early 70s, even 80s in some instances stylings. By Tudor coming in hard with the steel and gold or two-tone, they're following that trend. Two-tone is part of that move from those more sober 50s styles to the more swinging 70s. And, again, hit it out of the park, gave the audience exactly what they're after. Great fan service there. Tudor watches, really since the reintroduction back into the West, have always traded heavily on being value for money compared against other watches kind of in that price range. And that continues to be the case here. Tudor barely shifted any of the prices on their watches when brands like Breitling have gone up, on average, it looks like about 10%. Tudor, on the other hand, seem to have shifted just a few percent, if anything at all, remaining fantastic value for money. And finally, there is no brand hotter in watches right now than Rolex. There is no brand other than Tudor that can provide the community Rolex homages with a straight face and that the community can buy unapologetically, loving that they are Rolex homages. No other brand can do that but Tudor. And Tudor have done that in spades with these releases. Now, some of you, in light of what's going to come next, are going to accuse me of being biased in that space, of seeing too much. What I would say is I am not alone. The good people at Fratello, who love this watch, have made no bones about the fact, or love these watches, and the GMT Pro in particular, have made no bones about the fact that this is a watch very clearly inspired by the Rolex 1655. People at Hodinkee, who again love this watch and all of these releases, have again made no bones about the fact that these watches clearly lean really heavily on the old Explorer 1, that old Explorer 2 and the more recent Root Beer GMTs. There is barely a YouTuber, barely a blogger, barely a podcaster that isn't drawing those comparisons. If you go back in time, even the original Black Bay, which was based on an earlier Tudor, that Tudor itself was based on an earlier Rolex. These watches, at their core, give really strong Rolex vibes. That's their point. And I don't think I'm being biased in simply stating that as a fact. Okay, so that's why I think this release is magnificent. And as a YouTuber, I have got virtually nothing but praise for it. So why do I loathe this as a personal enthusiast? The first thing is I really dislike the S&G, the steel and gold, the two-tone. I don't like it as an aesthetic. It's really off-putting to me. Danny Milton and a bunch of other guys at Hodinkee have been making, and really across the net, have been making the push that the bad old days of two-tone are past. That what was once, I think Danny says, what was once kitsch is now, what's the word he uses, charming. I haven't made that leap. I haven't been able to. Some people look, when I think of the 70s, and I'm really a big fan of the idea of moving our kind of watch focus from the 50s to the late 60s, 70s. So I'm in for that. When I think of the freewheeling new casual 70s, I think of asymmetric dials and odd shapes, new materials, strange colors, all of that. That is free love and fun. Love it. I'm down for it. But when I think of two-tone, I think of horrible plaid suits and hair locked in place with hairspray. I think of stale cigarette smoke and like cigarette butts in empty beer cans. I think of cheap cabana and crappy cheese on toothpicks, ham steaks and pineapple. It just makes me think of all the terrible bits of the 70s. Steel and gold for me is perhaps irredeemable. But you know what? Having a bad release, having a bad color, not liking a watch is a long way from loathing, is a long way from really being repulsed by a release. So look, the steel and gold thing sets me up badly, but it's not the reason I'm repelled by this release. Okay, so why am I repelled by this release? It's more than just the steel and gold. It's more than just the tacky part of the 70s. The reason I'm repelled is because I want to love Tudor. There's a couple of Tudors. There's quite a few Tudors I quite like. There's one Tudor that's on my short list of watches to be purchased. That black ceramic, black bay, I think it's a 58 with the METAS certification, is absolutely stunning. I adore that watch. It is on my very short list of watches with an amber under consideration. This release has just killed that. That is now off. I cannot connect with the Tudor brand. This release has been not just toxic for these watches, but for the whole brand. Because you see, for me, I have to connect to the brand. Call me shallow. I don't care. It's who I am. There has to be something in the brand story, in their narrative, in their history, in their values that I would like to think coincides with what I would like to see in mine. And this release just poisoned that well completely. It did that because it didn't seem to matter where I looked. I just saw a Rolex homage, not a knockoff. They're not Steinhardt. I've flippantly said that elsewhere, but that's not fair. They're not Steinhardt. But everywhere I looked, I saw a homage to Rolex, whether it was the Black Bay Pro looking like the 1655, whether it was the steel and gold looking like a root beer, whether it was the not the Daytona, whether it was the Black Bay Chrono with real Daytona vibes. It's not just there's one thing. It's not just a bezel or a hand. It's not one watch out of some. It's all of them. And they just all rammed home to me that without Rolex, there is no Tudor. That Tudor doesn't have a story independently that I can connect with. Okay, so lastly, why did this watch release reinforce in my mind that it's really important that YouTubers take the opportunity to take in what other people are saying about a watch? Because you see, the thing was, when I first saw the Black Bay GMT Pro, I wrote it off as nothing more than a 1655 knockoff and probably a ridiculously thick slab-sided hockey puck that would be fundamentally unwearable. However, like I said in a previous video, I strongly believe in really YouTubers taking the opportunity to do some research, to look at what other people are saying and take that in. And so that's what I did. I took in a number of other videos, and the Watch Idiot did a great deep dive on this particular watch. Being a Tudor guy, he noticed nuances that had kind of gone past me, and he dived into an analysis of its size, which I would probably never have done on my own. As a result, he noticed things like the yellow hand on the yellow GMT hand being something of a hark back to the fan favorite, but commercially unsuccessful, North Flag. By diving into the thicknesses, he saw, for example, that whilst the watch doesn't get any thinner, where Tudor has put that thickness and how they've distributed it means the watch is probably not going to be as bad as we fear looking at just the straight numbers. As a result, I have warmed to that watch. It's less pointless knockoff which would be unwearable anyway, to being a slightly awkward homage that might be a bit weird but would probably be okay. One of the things I'd point out, though, is we're still in homage territory. It didn't take away any of my broader feelings around the concern of this release more broadly and how the whole thing is interpreted. But it did certainly give me a much better appreciation of that individual watch. Now, by considering that, am I being dishonest? Am I somehow surrendering my own opinion? I don't think so. I think what I'm doing is I'm making my opinion about that watch better. Someone who will notice things that I wouldn't have noticed, someone who will do some work that because of my in-group, out-group bias, I probably wouldn't have done, has shown me things which I've incorporated into my view and considered it and said, you know what? I was being a little unfair. That watch is better than my original thought would have been. You're not getting a dishonest view, you're just getting a better one. That I can then still look at that and step back and form my own view and say, you know what, it's not a knockoff, it's still a homage, and that doesn't change my overall view, is being a mature reviewer, is taking in other people's thoughts, collating those, thinking about them, coming up with your own opinion and your own idea, which is better than it would have been. And as I said, as a result, that's why I think this release and watching other people's reviews really reinforced my idea that you get the best reviews when people like me pay attention to what other people have said, but at the same time do our own analysis and synthesis over the top of that. Okay, so that's it. That's my overall take on the Tudor releases for Watches and Wonders 2022. There's really two parts of this. I expect a lot of you to disagree with me. It's much easier for you to disagree with the first part, where I'm giving you my opinion on why I think this release is fantastic. It's much more difficult for you to argue the toss on the second part, because that's not an opinion, that's my belief. That is my personal views, my personal ethics, my personal ideals being sort of manifested and being discussed. That's not something up for debate. That's much more something that's coming from inside. That last bit where I'm talking about how my opinion on a watch changed is again up for debate. And interestingly, you'll see I just weaved in there some discussions on videos I've been meaning to make about the difference between facts, opinions, beliefs, and how we discuss them. Anyway, love to get your feedback. Really looking forward to see what you say. I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches, and I'll see you later. Bye.